And tonight we're going to start off this presentation of the tales of a wayward geese with Bertrada. Bertrada's about to come up to the stage. Lucy is going to be doing a piece of spoken word to you, so just sit back and enjoy this. Lucy.
Have you ever rattled at the bars of a cage? No? Believe me, it's not fun. I had to rattle away for years before ever actually achieving anything. My parents didn't want me to get out, you see, but yet here I am, standing before you all in all my glory. It wasn't easy, mind you. Perhaps you've never had to rattle away at the bars of a cage, but you've probably had an argument with your parents. Perhaps you felt like you didn't fit in with the rest of the family. That was my problem. I chirped too much and too loud. I chirped about things that didn't need chirping about, apparently. And there was always supposed to be a time and a place for singing, but that time was never now, and that place was never here. And don't get me started on the lectures about appearance. Your feathers are far too short. And what have you done to the colour? It's far too bright and unnatural. I couldn't chirp about the things I believed in. I couldn't sing the tunes in my head. I couldn't look the way I wanted to. Why did they want me to stay so badly? I never got the answer to that question. No matter how many times I asked, it was always the same. You're our girl, our little bird. The big world is no place for a little bird like you. They honestly expected me to just sit there, miserable, for hours, days, weeks, months, years on end, for no reason. Just a good, obedient little bird. I never brought anything to the cage because they didn't let me. I got nothing out of life, but they didn't really care. As long as I was where they wanted me to be, that's all that mattered. And eventually, I couldn't handle it anymore. I'd reached an age where all the other birds had grown up and left the nest, but yet here I was, still stuck there, longing to be free. Rattle, rattle, rattle. They tried to keep me in, but eventually, the chain rusted away, and the lock shattered, and they realized that it was no use. I was getting out. I was flying away.
I wish I could stay.
Big. They picked at my ears until they were raw at all the dangers that awaited me. But I just thought, what's the use of life without a little danger? Before taking flight, they chirped some advice about the world. Don't eat any funny seeds. Don't bathe in just any bird bath. Don't drink from just any pond. And please be careful around cocks and roosters and just any male birds of any species, to be honest. You don't realize how suffocated you felt until you've tasted fresh air. I remember feeling the wind blowing through my wings for the first time. And I remember thinking something was wrong because my heart was pounding out of my chest and my eyes were bulging so wide and my little legs had gone so numb. I thought they'd fallen off, but turns out I was experiencing my first adrenaline rush. Fear and excitement and hope all at once. That's what freedom feels like. I can choose my own flight path now. Now no one can tell me no. No one can tell me that these feathers are more desirable than those feathers. No one can tell me where or what I can and cannot sing. I can sing my little heart out now. I was told that I chirped too much. Well, I was going to find somewhere where my chirping was appreciated, where it was listened to and taken seriously. That place was out there. It had to be. I was going to find other birds with bright and colourful, wild wings who loved to chirp and sing as much as I did. Other birds who had escaped the cage. Birds who would make up my true family. I knew that there would be dangers and that I had a lot to learn and that the journey would be perilous. And I knew that there would be other birds I should avoid and creatures that would aim to do me harm, but I had to give it a shot. My wings would grow tired and time would come where I would have to build myself a nest. No more cages for me. But until then, I was going to enjoy my newfound freedom because God knows I've waited long enough for it. Thank you.
Lucy, that was brilliant. And hopefully quite inspiring as well to think about the way that geese and other birds migrate around the world. Now, geese in the Solway are an enigmatic species which has kind of been here since time immemorial. It's a species which probably marks the passing of the year. So when the geese arrive at this time of year, we know that winter's on its way. And when the geese leave again in the spring, we know that the summer's coming. So I would imagine for years and years and years, ever since man has been here, it's been something which told the time of the year to everyone. And as a person in this part of the world who's done an awful lot of work with geese, I call him Mr. Goose, Dr. Larry Griffin. He's been the leading edge of creating technology to understand how the geese move around the world and the leading edge of conservation of geese. We're really proud to have Larry, who's about to come up to the stage to give the next presentation. And Larry, you maybe want to tell us a little bit about yourself whilst I get the presentation ready.
Okay, thanks very much, Nick. Thanks for inviting me here tonight and laying on this gig. I'd rather not talk about myself really, but it's I love Mowbray. It's a nice place to come to because I came here when they were sort of rebuilding it all at the start. And had a really nice walk around the gardens the other day, and lots of nice exotic plantings have gone on, and little tape loops, I think, of crocodiles calling from the woods and whatnot was quite nice. But yeah, I think it's a good place to bring your kids if you've got kids to have a play around. And certainly I was sort of taken in by it all, and the little mushrooms growing at the tree stumps and whatnot, little sculptures, they've done kind of like little cloud animals up in the trees out of chicken wire, which I thought was quite neat. It's quite effective. And yeah, it kind of reminded me of myself a bit, how ethereal I am, and how much my life just ebbs away and there's nothing much left of me. But yeah, happy to start soon. I'll keep going, all right, yeah. So once upon a time, there was a little lad in London who enjoyed saving blackbirds in their nests and trying to raise the eggs away from cats, which completely polluted the whole place. There were thousands of them, feral cats everywhere. So I even, probably illegally, I used to take song thrush eggs from song thrush nests and try to raise them in dunnock nests because dunnocks were way more effective at getting their young through than song thrushes. So I thought that might be a good idea to get them away from the cats. And that's, I think, what brought me towards birds in a lot of ways and natural habitats, was looking after nests and watching the young grow up and collecting slow worms on Box Hill. But yeah, are we there? Right. So yes, geese, good neighbours. I haven't put the Scottish phrase in there because I'm from London. Home and away. So a little play on the old Australian soaps as well. But I'd say geese, what a brilliant bird they are. Brilliant group of birds, along with swans, the other wildfowl. This region is a really good place for them. You're lucky if you live around here. D&G, Dumfries and Galloway, brilliant place. Lots of good goose species, lots of wild spectacles to see. And I just want to go through a few of those tonight, a bit of the research I've been doing on some of these species that come here. So I hope you can all pretty much see that. It's quite small still, because there's like a band at the top now that wasn't there before, but I've brought a pointy stick, black bamboo, never fails. So that says, why tag? Why would you want to tag geese? Why can't you just observe them, ring them, colour mark them and watch them, what they're up to, and go to all these different places and see what's going on with them? Well, basically they're covering huge distances on their migrations, great vast remote expanses, wastelands, no people living there. Pink-footed geese, for example, these little green lines here, they're going away up to the farthest point of land that you can find, basically. You can't go any further north on land until you hit the North Pole. So they're going away up there. We've got basically 4 species of Arctic goose that visit the Solway area. You've got 2 grey goose species, answer species. So you've got the pink-footed goose and the green and white-fronted goose, which is what I'll be going into detail more about tonight, is the green and white-fronted goose. And then you've got the 2 black Branter geese as well, which are a bit smaller, which is the Brent goose, which comes here from Canada. There's probably about 200 of those really on the Solway, so not a big player. Mainly out west, Wigton, Garlaston Bay areas, feed on eelgrass. And of course, the Barnacle Goose, which I was involved heavily with when I first arrived in Dumfries and worked at Wildfowl Wetlands Trust at Clavrock. Their reserve was established there 50 years ago now to try and help conserve the Barnacle Geese and bring their numbers back. So Svalbard Barnacle Goose is the other one here on the Solway. So yeah, to get at all these stories, where they're breeding, what the sites they're staging at, how many young they have, are they nesting and all that sort of stuff, how they're surviving. Really, the only way to do that now, I feel, is to remove the subjectivity of ourselves interpreting things and try and let them give their own diary of events. So it's more objective, and you tag them, basically. Tags, I've helped design it with a Polish company originally and then with a Lithuanian company. And these little GPS tags, kind of like what you've got in your phones or Fitbits or whatever, have come down in size now such that they're sub 20 grams. So very light, all the aerials are inside them now. And really, if you can fit them carefully and catch the birds carefully, they're not in any way detrimental to the bird's welfare. So the birds carry on as usual, as far as we can tell, compared to all the normal birds, without any attachments. So what is going to come up next will be a slide that just quickly goes through the animated journeys of these geese, where they're all going, the different species. So these little flyways will light up as the geese leave at different times of year and move along these little trajectories here. So it'll go pretty quick, but I'm hoping that when it runs, I'll be able to say to Nick, pause, and he'll pause it at certain points, and I can just sort of recap on where things are at. This bean goose, I'll come back to right at the end, hopefully, if I remember, is a tiger bean goose now. It's known as a separate species, very threatened in Scotland. Basically only 250 of them, if you're lucky. And they're all out at Slamannan near Falkirk now, on the plateau there. The ones that were down the Yare Valley in Norfolk have pretty much gone extinct. These guys, we think, were in the Castle Douglas area, on the knoll there and the marshes there, until about the 1990s, the last ones. Used to be about 500. Basically, they are now short stopping. They're staging and stopping for winter further east because things have probably warmed up enough for them there. So yeah, there's a little sort of legacy goose. Nothing on the Brent geese. I'm not going to cover them because there's so few of them and I've never tagged them. I've never caught them. So mostly, as I say, it'll be on the Greenland white-fronted goose. Can I have the next slide, please, Nick? With a bit of pausing. That's it. So this is, yeah, could you pause it there? Sorry. Hang on, if you do it over there on the right, it won't be in the way. So if you left, that's it, there. So this is going to be basically every 12 hours rattling through. Ignore 2018, that doesn't really matter. That was just to get them all on the same slide showing up. It's basically 2018 to 2020, I think these were. All the different tags that are fitted to tiger bean geese. Okay, not part of this region now, so we can sort of ignore that in a bit. Svalbard barnacle geese going from places like RSPB Merse Head, WWT Clavrock, you probably know it well, the barnacle goose. The pink-footed goose, the Icelandic pink-footed goose, which is the most numerous in the region and also in the UK. There's almost 500,000 of them. Very itinerant. They're quite happy to be on the Solway one day and then be up in Fife the next day and then come back again. So they don't mind just flying about quite a lot, really. And then finally, blue ones, the most sort of important ones for this talk, are the Greenland white-fronted geese. So they're going up to Iceland, staging there, and then they're going across the Greenland ice cap. So here we are. We're starting off at February, mid-February, any year really. And you saw there, just before the slide got stopped, basically already in mid-Feb, some of our geese already thinking about leaving. They're already crossing the North Sea and going to Denmark. So things are starting to thaw out a little bit in Denmark. And then eventually you're going to see them go up to Norway and then up to Sweden when that's thawed out enough, because they're temperate geese. They're lower down. They're not up in the Arctic like these other guys. So they're ahead of the game. They're off. So if we go on again, that will probably sit like that for a little while, in which I'll have to fill a bit. And then a few more go across there. So we're using those sort of tags to look at wind farm conflicts, offshore wind farms, a lot of planned offshore wind farms in the Firth of Forth. So the tags have data on a whole number of different levels, a whole load of applied conservation issues. As you get into March further and further, gradually pink feet start warming up. They're starting to think about heading north. So some that have been down in Norfolk, say, they'll start moving up to Strathbeg and Moray Firth. Some that are at Martin Mere will start heading up to Caithness, Sutherland area. So as you get towards the end of March, you'll start seeing a whole lot of stuff jigging about that's beginning to move now, including the white fronts. There we go. So triangles your tiger bean geese, circles your green and white fronts, and the race is on. Off they go. So your green and white fronts are up to Iceland, followed by some pink feet. Start of April, the tigers have already moved up there to Norway. They're getting on with it, and soon they're going to be heading up to their breeding grounds. These guys, they're just heading off from the wintering grounds. Quite a tight front across there. So you can see you wouldn't really necessarily want to put a big wind farm in there. You could put a wind farm in there from the point of view of geese. It wouldn't matter so much for them. Anyway, that's beside the point. These guys are all heading up, So quite a spread of dates. You're now to the end of April. Everything's pretty much staging in Iceland by the end of April. All the pink feet, all the white fronts. Barnacle geese starting to get itchy feet. Photo periods changing, boof, off they go. They're up to Norway now. The Svalbard pink feet have left Rockcliffe Marsh in Cumbria. So they're heading ultimately to Svalbard. Same time, mid-May, at the start of May rather, you're starting to get the white fronts going across the ice cap. So traveled across the Greenland Sea, about 800 miles over the mile high ice cap. Over here at West Greenland, this is their breeding area, okay? Pink feet starting to head up as well, East Greenland. Some of them breed there. The rest are now down on nests. Everything's nesting here. The tiger bean geese have already been down nesting at the start of May. Barnacle geese nesting, still into June. Still some barnacle geese hanging around on Rockcliffe. There's quite a lot of variation, and then, oh, it's going now. So yeah, beyond the first week of June, that's only just heading up. So that's important later on again, in terms of when you're thinking about climate change, just how much variation you've got to play with in the geese as they exist now, even. A lot of good variation in there. But yeah, you've got to go there when the conditions are right. You've got to be able to feed. You've got to be able to feed up before you move on there. So there's these stages in your journey. Most of them have got 3 stages, really. And of course, these guys, as I say, the pink-footed geese eventually get right up there to the north. They can't go any further. You see them on the last bit of rock. They just sit there and they molt. That's where they molt their feathers, the flight feathers, ready to come back. So they find enough greenery up there to get by and get the energy they need. Next one, please. Sorry, my throat's dried out. Yeah, so flipping back to winter, I mean, it's just, when it comes autumn, it's basically the reverse of all that animation there, which was spring to summer, summer through to autumn, back down to winter. So coming down to Britain and Ireland, well, this is a typical late October pattern of temperature change. It's going to happen tonight, tomorrow night, actually, as it happens, really, as well. Windy.com, I love looking at that. Great little app. Obsessed with wind patterns, obsessed with temperatures, seeing what's going to happen to the geese as they try and migrate. Basically, you can see there straight away kind of the draw of the west coast of Scotland down into here and down into Wales and Ireland as well. You can see all the bits where all the geese turn up, basically. That's where they can stay. Not frozen up. And just looking at that, even without any habitat or anything, you've almost got the whole distribution of all the geese around the UK. So pretty easy. Then if you laid on, say, snow, typical snow covers when it happens. In the winter, this was February 2021. Again, what do you see? Well, it's the old Solway thawed out, nice, hospitable little bit. And why is that thawed out? Well, Brian will go into a lot of that later on, but basically the Gulf Stream coming up keeps these west coast areas a little bit warmer. So there's been plenty of times when I've been at home, just up on the hill at maybe there, a little bit higher, a little bit more inland, and it's snowed or it's frozen up, and you get in your car and you're driving to work, or I used to drive to work, so don't work from anymore. And you get over the hill at Wardlaw, past Glencaper, and suddenly it's all green in front of you, and there are the geese feeding away on the fields, on the salt marsh. So very much that's the pattern, west coast. So there you've got your barnacle distribution. There you've got your white fronts. There you've got your white fronts. Then you've got white fronts, white-fronted geese all up here. Okay, and if you're a pink foot and you're in here, and your stubbles and your pastures have just been covered by snow, what they do is they just come on down here. So Sometimes you get counts of 40, 50,000 on a Webb's count on a winter's day down at the Solway. Why else do you come down here? Well, this is just basically a quick screen grab of where the red is where the salt marsh habitat is. So that's something else in this region we excel in, is salt marsh. Great big uniform habitat of basically herb-rich, grass-rich, probably 10 centimeters high at most, so nice and short. Barnacle geese have got little stubby bills, pink-footed geese slightly bigger, but basically pink feet, barnacle geese, that's what they're coming, that's what they used to use. They were very happy living on salt marsh. Brent geese as well to an extent, although they like the eelgrass just offshore as well at low tide to eat. And these are what I would call fairly much wild, pristine habitats a lot of the time. You know, the way we look for these sort of rewilded habitat nowadays and what we're going to create as a climax community. Well, these are pretty much climax communities, pretty much as they were, not really changed at all that much. Tidal, so that keeps them in check, but also you've got all of the original sort of herbivores on there, like roe deer, there's hares on there, there's otters, there's badgers, so you've got all of the usual complement of species, and geese are just one of those. They're what I would call meso herbivore. So to me, seeing the big flocks, thousands of geese feeding away, and the sort of, when you get the heat shimmer on the salt marsh in April, it's this kind of low sort of murmuring noise. It really comes through, and you think it can't be that far off what it would look like if you're looking at like wildebeest in Africa or something like that. It's really amazing what you can get just by looking out and sort of hide on the Solway like that. And then I'd say, without wanting to go too far, they're slightly in the field of ecosystem engineers as well, because they graze the sword down even lower as the winter goes on, and that then does facilitate a lot of the other wading birds like lapwing and redshank in the structure of the community that's left. And also they crop it themselves. So much in the way that we mow our grass and you get a new flush of grass, they sort of go round it every 7 days or so. And they'll get the plantains coming in fresh, the ribwort plantains, they'll get the other glassworts growing in as well. So they've got a sort of harvesting strategy. And of course, also they are seed carriers. So in a way, if there's potential habitat areas elsewhere, sediments occurring where they're going to roost, they will take seeds in their droppings. And those seeds can be viable, I believe, in some geese for sort of up to 4 days for different species. So you've got a chance there again, when Brian talks about climate change and shifts in zones of potential habitats, they maybe can create their own destiny, I guess, in that regard. Another reason then for birds like geese being in D&G as well is a lot of good habitat here for the white front. So this is just bog, pattern mire communities, again, fairly historic, sort of climax communities almost. A lot more patchy, the resources on those, the bogs, in terms of the vegetation resources. So you'll get little pools, you get them full of bog bean and cotton grass, and actually there, rather than you just being able to kind of graze across it in a big flock, really you need to kind of know where that resource is. So you need to be able to pass on that knowledge to your young. And you also need to be able to build up a bit of a team, a bit of a clan behind you, because you're probably going to have to fight for that resource a bit in some years. So what you tend to see in the green and white fronts that get attracted to that resource, when they do get out onto the pastures as well nearby, is you tend to see them bickering a lot more. You seem to see clans of birds dotted about that are basically engaged in a bit of fighting, kind of when they don't need to bother. But I think it's probably a legacy, a leftover of this old habitat, which until about sort of 40, 50 years ago, they've basically gradually abandoned it more and more and moved on to the kind of bright green intensive pastures that the other geese are so familiar on. So there's leftover behaviours in there, but they are adapting, I would say. So yeah, just to crack on, this is the bird that I want to talk the rest of the presentation about, really, is the green and white fronted goose. Really cracking bird, quite aloof, quite difficult to get near sometimes. I don't know if you know, like jays and missel thrushes, the way they always seem to be just over there and flit off before you kind of get your binoculars up on that. These guys are masters at being down a wee dip on what looks like a flat field or in amongst the rushes. This is an adult, nice adult one. So you've got the black belly bars, doesn't matter if it's male or female, asymmetric, it's not symmetrical patterning. Black belly bars, orange bare parts, the bill and legs, getting up to 3 kilos for an adult male, 2.5 for a female. This lovely white fronds develops with age. So paling behind it is this little juvenile of the year. So that's probably just flown back. This might be October time. Little black nib on the bill and hasn't got the white fronds and hasn't got the black belly bars yet. They'll develop during the winter. So you can tell the ages apart quite well for the first year. Really nice to hold. I'd really recommend giving them a little cuddle, one of these. Really nice and warm, really thick feathering. Always a joy on a cold winter's day after you've been waiting 7 days for one to walk into your netting area. So this is the other way you probably see them. If you go to Isla, something like that, on these lovely kind of old boggy habitat wetlands, just tucked down, you might start to spot them. The little white fronds is quite an alert sign. You know, they put their heads up, the males, when they're trying to protect the young. They've spotted a danger, a goshawk or whatever. Up go the heads, and that's quite a good signal that something's wrong. Or in this case, I've appeared with my telescope, and it's like, oh, heads up. So they just about make out the little orange collars that you'll see later that we use to mark them with as well, so we can actually tell who's who. But yeah, typical habitat, still on the boglands a bit, but also there's slightly more improved pastures in the background on Isla there. So as I say, travel about small family groups, really. It's not one of those big, massive flocking geese like the pink-footed geese or the barnacle geese and Brent as well in certain circumstances. Very shy and wary, quite unobtrusive a lot of the time. So many people can go to Loch End and say, oh, you know, the white fronts aren't in yet. But actually, when you speak to the old observers there, some of those observers who watch their flocks for the last 40, 50 years, they'll know the little places they go, the little wetlands they've got into, and actually the birds are there. It's just that you cannot see them unless you know those places. So they're quite traditional like that. They've got a good, I think they've got good mind maps of where they're going, where the sites are. And it's good to see Linda here as well, because she lives at Black Park. So I often go there to see the geese, because that is one of the few places where you can see them out in the open quite well on the fields there. And that's where we try and catch them quite a bit, of course. So yeah, quite a lot of defensive traits that they have, and they build up these kind of old family relations, so they can have extended families of young, and they're young that go on even for 10 years sometimes. So if they're not accidentally or illegally shot in somewhere like Iceland still, you have this potential for transmission down through the generations about sites here, about sites in other areas on the staging grounds. And of course about the migration routes as well, potentially. So yeah, there's a classic sort of example of the pointless bickering that goes on between Team A over here, this sort of referee, and Team B here. So these guys don't want any more to do, they're kind of walking away, but this guy's going for it, head down, going to take them on, and this lot are going to come in and back them up. But yeah, sort of a group like that of 20, that's fairly standard. And that might be, you know, mum, dad there and generations of young ones, or others that have just pitched in and fancy like joining in with them. So yeah, we still haven't done enough genetics work, I'd say, on these things. There's still a lot to be done on that front, I think. But yeah, beautiful bird like that, seeing it there. That's the range, the same. We saw that in the sort of first slide a bit, but basically 800 miles across the ocean there, staging Iceland, south and southwest coast. The Irish birds, or Wexford population, is a very big part of the population. That tends to leapfrog the Scottish birds and stage in the north part and then breed in the north part, whereas the Scottish birds, Wales, and some of the North Irish populations stage in the south more, breed in the south. So it's sort of two parts to the main global flyway. The global flyway is about 20,000 birds now, 21,000 birds. That's all, that's not a lot. This distance, a wee bit longer, probably more like 1,000 miles, and half of it's kind of sea, half of it's ice. So there's no way of really feeding up, getting extra energy, or even taking on water in a lot of these places as they get from the spring staging areas to the breeding areas. So yeah, basically you've got to cover all that, and you've got to try and work out what the problems are for these guys, because they are, or they have massively declined, as I'll show you in the next slide. And that was just to say, yeah, if you think it's easier to go this away to North America, well, actually it's not, because that's about 5,000 kilometers before you reach things that are going to be thawed out at the same time as year over winter, that aren't snow and ice covered. So actually it's a good strategy coming to the UK. Here, say they're really sort of feeding in these wet pastures in a lot of places. Some of them are very improved. Iceland, you are now starting to see with climate change again, changes in land use. So people are investing in their meadows, they're reseeding them with things like perennial ryegrass, lolium, draining the land, putting in crops even. So there's barley growing now. That has implications for the autumn because you get the stubbles that can hold the birds up. So all sorts of changes going on there in the cropping land use. And it's warming up. And then, of course, in Greenland, well, so far, not a huge amount has changed on the ground there. So things have changed at our end, things have changed at Iceland. But then if you carry on through and start getting ahead of yourself, actually, when you arrive in Greenland, it's still as bad as it always was in terms of being freezing cold and covered in snow and ice. So it's these kind of lack of synchronies or things falling out of synchrony that are a bit of a problem for them, I think, or could be. So yeah, Brian will go into a little bit more of that as well, about how these habitats might change on the breeding grounds. It's basically Arctic tundra, there's little sedge communities again. Green and white fronts have got a much bigger bill and they're willing to grub on in there and dig out roots. So as long as it's not completely frozen solid, they can still be all right. They're not as reliant on grazing. So the structure in the UK is this. Basically, there's probably about 30 odd little sort of sub-flocks scattered across the coasts on the boglands and the pastures there. The Wexford flock, as I say, is a bit of an outlier because that contains about 8,000 to 10,000 birds down in the southeast there, and that is reclaimed slobland. So that was drained areas. Bund was put up, and that is now sown with grasses, various crops, including sugar beet, which is a real draw for things like white fronts because you can put on fat really quick if you eat sugar beet. Everything else, something like Isla, okay, that's called a flock, but actually that is, again, you've got this breakdown down to the clan all the way up into sort of sub-flocks and flocks that gradually aggregate together. So it depends how far you zoom in as to what you call a flock, these guys really. So yeah, so two parts to it really. There's the sort of Wexford half and the Scottish Isla kind of Kintyre half of the population. And they really, well, overall, those two kind of account for 70% of the birds. And then you just got all these other little flocks scattered about, like the Lochaken group or the Stranraer group. And there's one on Lismore, places like that, Caithness, just a couple of hundred birds. And they've been visiting those sites for sort of probably 100 years or more, you know, and each one's got its own little counter. Population dynamics of these guys driven by adult survival and productivity, basically. So if you drop in adult survival, that has much more impact than if you don't produce young in a year. So yeah, the headline figure there that was the worry and led into a lot of these studies is you've lost 40% of the global population in 20 years. So that's a big decline, massive, free fall. Wexford was slightly slower and that was part of the question, but the Scottish group and the other sites in Ireland were declining by that rate, if not more. The main problem coming up to the sort of coming up to 2010, I suppose, was that most of the knowledge we had about green and white fronted geese was based on what a group of students who set up in the 1980s in Wales, who called themselves the Green and White Fronted Goose Study, done a hell of a lot of work, expeditions up to Iceland and Greenland, and also just really worked on the Wexford group because they're much more, you could catch them there a lot easier. So a lot of the studying has been done in Wexford. So it was time just before the Galloway Glens project really to get into the Scottish birds a lot more and work out what they were doing, this sort of other half of the population. So yeah, originally back in 2008, there was a real effort to understand the Lochaken group because they were going down the pan. So we wanted to know what was wrong with the site there. So that was the start of the tracking. 2009, you had a flyover workshop. Again, the impetus was on trying to mark and tag birds in Scotland. And basically, up to 2008, only 30 had ever been caught and collared in Scotland. But now we are up to, what's that, 450 there now over a decade of work and 50 catches or so across 5 sites. So we're right up now to having a good kind of baseline marked population where you can look at things like migration, between the flocks. You can look at adult survival, lifetime reproductive success, all of those sort of things, which are essential if you're trying to do a sort of life table of why things are going down the pan for white fronts. That's a very quick one and only graph. I should say dotted lines are your local flocks. That's the Loch Ken group in white, dotted line, back to 1997. Massive decline, 60-odd% decline. Same really for the Stranraer group. So now I think this last winter it was 145 at Loch Ken, which I'm plotted on here, and 166 at Stranraer. So down from the heady height, sorry, this is the scale here for those two, of sort of 600-700 back in 97. So it was really quite a common bird then in that area. Only hopeful thing is it's kind of leveling out. It's almost a curve. You hope it's going to be a happy smiley curve in the next 10 years or so. And then the other line is really just comparing it to the other big player, which is Isla. So that's your solid white line, and that's the scale for that up here. So they're up at 14,000 birds, but they're now down to scraping along at 6,000 birds. So it's not very good there either. This is how you catch them. If you're going to find out anything about birds, really, you have to catch them and you have to collar them, mark them in some way. So this is a wintry little field where we've put out some bait, which is beat, and you can net them like that. So when all their heads are down, they're quite stable. Yeah, it is a bit like that. You're like, "Ugh." But yeah, if you play it right and you do everything correctly, then nothing gets injured. And then you run out and you bag them up, and yes, you take all their biometrics and you collar them. And it's a long old process usually, and there's plenty of times where you sit by a field and nothing really happens because they're very, very wary. They've got a very good, fine understanding of their little landscape, basically. And if they see a wee stick out of place, you can tell they're not coming in. Many a time I wish I'd buried the firing cable at midnight with the spade and not left it going across the green grass field, because you can see them walk up to it. They'll quite happily walk up, feed up, and then they'll stop and jump out of the way and fly off or something crazy. And we often have debates about that, but yeah, you should bury the cable. So yeah, these are the collars. You put a little leg ring on because sometimes the collars fall off or get shot off or whatever happens to it. And then you might take an abdominal profile. This is where they put their fat on when they've eaten a lot of grass. So they'll try and put on a sort of bar of butter, basically, to try and get up to Iceland, or a Mars bar. And then, oh yeah, this is a lovely little Arthur Thirlwell here. So he's been doing this 50 years or so, hasn't he? He's been going around the loch and checking on the birds. He loves them. So yeah, he's been doing it a long old time, counting the birds. And this is Mitch Wiegman from America, who says things like, "Dang, man," when things go wrong a bit. But he's great, and he's going to be funding another 20 tags, I think, now, because he's just become a professor of some uni out there and has made his way through. So yeah, he's funding some tags this winter, so we'll probably be doing some more catching work. And my other colleague there is Cole Mitchell, who likes sitting in ditches with me for some reason. So yeah, that's your aim. Catch the birds, get the things on. And these were the original types of tags we used to do. This was back in 2011, I think. Yeah, 2011, we actually started to get to the point where tags were getting small enough, the little GPS collars, GPS tags, and a solar panel. So this was what was sent to me by the manufacturers, as a solar panel and a chunk. And these were Bluetooth. So I spent a lot of time in the kitchen kind of cutting out collars and making these, basically. So I'd say they're very Heath Robinson, very lightweight, really good though. Birds accepted them well, migrated, everything went brilliantly. And there's V4F, actually, Arthur Thurl reported 5 days ago, I think. That's back at Loch Ken. So that's 12 years on. That's still going. And my little collar is still in place and the little solar panel. Haven't got a single byte of data out of them. Not a one. Never worked. So that was rubbish. That was Bluetooth. So yeah, never used that. I think the range is about a yard, something like that. But it avoided using the elasticated. We used to use backpacks. As you saw when Mitch was holding that bird, there's a backpack. The observant amongst you will have seen that little tag there, and it's like an elastication harness that goes around them. But white fronts don't like them. White fronts just have them for dinner. They just tear them off. So they get wasted too. So this collar is a great way of doing it. And then this is like the Mark V version that I designed with the Polish people, Ecotone, which actually does work. And that could be sort of glued or masticed and basically got onto the original collar types. Gradually, they evolved a bit further to do a 3D printed collar that you could just click shut and it stayed on the bird. That's how much the collars fade through time. So they end up going a sort of greeny color after about 5-10 years. So they just match in with the plumage. So that was actually a recaptured bird, which is pretty rare. So yeah, we did all that for looking at what the hell is going wrong with these birds in Loch Hen. And actually, it turns out nothing really much is going wrong with the birds in Loch Hen. So that was good. But it did prove kind of that this thing of, oh, you know, they've gone, no one knows where they are, these mysterious birds, maybe they've gone to Stranraer or something like that. No, they haven't. They're just in a little bit of the field where you haven't gone and looked in, okay? So don't get all mysterious about it. They're there all the time. So yeah, this we used to feed into the Galloway Glens project was because you get all these fixes, GPS fixes, like 10 per day and the roost sites and all that, you can actually go to the farmers, which the RSPB did, and design little management plans just to help them that wee bit more as well. So instead of perhaps slurrying all your fields at once, you might slurry like half of them and then leave a little gap and then do the other half, because they don't need a lot. I mean, you're only talking sort of 5-6 fields at Waterside, and the brilliantly managed Black Park, there's only say 4 or 5 fields there. And then this bit up in Meridional and Finneness, you know, another 5-6 fields. And that runs that whole population all winter. They don't need a lot. And then a few little safe roost sites, you know. So yeah, lack of disturbance and a good bit of food and they're fine. They're fine for the winter. So not really anything too drastically bad at our end of the flyway. How much longer have I got, Nick? Sorry. Should I keep going? All right, sorry, because I feel like performance coming on because of where we are. But we used to download the data with a Yagi, which is like an aerial. You used to have to point it at the tag, and the tags gradually got better and better. So you moved up from like the 1 meter of the Bluetooth to what was given by the Polish as about 300 meters. Well, it wasn't 300 meters. So you'd stand with your Yagi and your little laptop and not get a single sort of data out those tags. So what I did, back in the old days, what I did was, some of you might know Richard Hesketh, who used to manage Calavrock Reserve. He had sheep there, and he sheared his Hebridean sheep. And I took all the shavings and I glued them on an old plastic Mac that I had, and basically drove up to this field here at Finneness. And I put the jacket on, and I put on what doesn't look out of place now was a white respirator face mask. So I would have looked odd back then, but now I wouldn't do, I don't think. And a big fleecy coat, the respirator. And then on my knees, I had those, what do you call them, little like skateboarder pads, knee pads from my son when he was 10. So they were a bit tight. And then I went through the gate and I crawled into the field on my hands and knees for about 300 meters, I reckon. To get close to the flock with all the laptop, netbook tucked down here, the Yagi tucked down there, crawled out there on my hands and knees, looking like a sheep. And then I got to the rock. I remember getting to the rock where they were just by it, and I actually got to within 50 yards of them. I thought brilliant, and I thought I'll get onto the download, and I actually just had to kind of collapse for a bit because I was so sweaty, so absolutely knackered, and had it. I just lay behind this rock for about 5 minutes, and then eventually dragged the wee netbook out, turned it on, problem reboot, turn it on again, and just like these geese just chatting away behind me. Pulled the aerial out, got it plugged in, and just kind of stuck it over my shoulder, and managed to finally get this. That was the first bloody data I got. Was right through to the breeding season. See it streaming in, all these lines of data. It's beautiful, seeing it stream across the screen, and then some idiot in a transit van came out of Meridional and tooted his horn as he left the farm, and all the geese bloody got up and left. I was so angry, but I was happy because I had the data, and then I remember the final indignity. the final indignity was hearing the approach of the quad bike of the actual farmer. So yeah, the Finneness farmer gradually getting louder and louder, and I eventually had to turn around and face him. And all the while he'd been coming over, I was just thinking, what the hell am I going to say to him? How am I going to explain this one? But yeah, it's the first time I've seen him laugh out loud, actually. So he said he thought one of his stock was down, and he'd come out to rescue it, and yeah, just had this little comedy moment with him. But yeah, it was worth it. It was worth it, and it was a breeding season data, and it was a successful breeder. So I'd do it again, I think, probably. But yeah, thankfully everything's much improved now since then, and now I just have to sit at my desk. I can sit anywhere. I can sit in a cafe and go, "Oh, what are my birds doing now?" And they're talking to the GSM phone network, so they're just ringing up, saying hello, downloading their data every day virtually. As long as you've got GSM network, 4G, they're in there, and you can talk back to them. You can send them commands to collect their data differently and all of that. So yeah, things have moved on massively. Anyway, sorry. Right. So yeah, we managed to design a system where you could track the females. That was the big deal, because it was always you put the tags on the males because they had the aerial sticking out the back, so you didn't want to affect the mating. But now we're getting into the females, so we could really start to look with these new and improved tag collars, what the true breeding effort was and what the failure rates were like. So this is another animation sequence starting in May up in Greenland for one of our Loch-Ken birds. Every 3 hours, this is ticking away. The lines are already in place showing where they went. So this dot will just move out on those lines. It will move out the way of the off screen sometimes. But basically they're using these little marshes next to a sort of lake that would have been frozen. It's now thawed out. Getting into June, it's getting quite late for white fronts. Is it going to breed? Isn't it going to breed? It's hopping about. It's building up resources all the time. It's feeding, feeding, feeding. Every now and then, oh, in there. What's that about? Just in the sort of slight scarp of this rocky crag bit here. It just went to a site, and then later you'll start to see it go back there again. That was probably an egg-laying trip. That's it, 10th of June, it's settled down. Goes down for a little feed at the shore one day. Basically, every 3 hours, it's still there, still there, still there. So that's it. That's why I have to build up the resources. They've got to sit on those eggs now for a month, basically. 27 days. Just there and hope no one spots them, hope no predator gets them. But come the 15th, ooh, off it goes. That's it. It's all over. That's it. The whole journey from Scotland to Iceland to Greenland is all over now. That will not nest again that season. So it failed after, what, 5 days there. But we can actually get at that quite a narrow window of breeding effort. So yeah, what have we found out? Well, there are a lot of sort of myths about white fronts, as I say, from different times, but legend had it that there were birds that rarely even tried to breed in their lifetimes, because when people were seeing them back on the wintering grounds and they were marked birds, they very rarely, if ever, had young with them. So they say, oh, they don't get the condition, they don't breed in Greenland. But actually what we found, even just 1 year, was 10 adult females. When you track them, actually 9 of them, and you get the data back, 9 of them had a damn good go at breeding. So they might have failed 5 days, 10 days, but actually all of them had a go. They don't defer. So they're getting the resources they need. So the winter habitats are okay. Probably Iceland's okay. And when they get to Greenland, probably that's okay in pre-breeding terms. But then you've got this whole raft of possibilities, unfortunately, as to why they don't breed what you'd say, I suppose, successfully in terms of bringing back young to the winter grounds, to Loch-Ken, to Stranraer. Many factors that play in that. Say the females have got to get body conditioned to allow for egg laying, and they've got to get body conditioned to sit on that nest basically non-stop for sort of 27, 30 days. Then they've got to wander about with the young. Then they've got to molt as well. That's incredibly energy intensive. So they've got to find the right resources for that. Going up, they've got to surf that green wave as spring moves north. They've got to surf it, as they say, or they've got to get ahead of it so that when they get somewhere, they can feed up on the nutritious growth as it comes through. So there's a lot of timing in that. Then there's just the hazards of getting across the sea, the ice. You can't feed on top of the ice cap. And you can't be predicting conditions at one site from another, really. So what happens in Wexford, Southeast Ireland, doesn't necessarily tell you a lot about what's happening in Iceland. What happens in Iceland doesn't really tell you what's happening on the west coast of Greenland. Very different places, very different weather systems. So even when you're across, 1st of May tends to be the typical arrival date, the start of the arrivals. It's quite contracted, quite a narrow period. They're all getting over there from Iceland. 2-3 years ago, I think it was, -15 they arrived to. Snow on the ground, ice everywhere. You could look from the MODIS satellite image, -15. That's how it stayed almost to the end of May. So they got to survive that. You can't feed on anything. There's not really much to feed. You can't dig down into the frozen substrate. There's no new grass or anything. So personally, I don't know how they did it. They did survive it, some of them. Other times when I when I went up there on an expedition to see why it was Greenland, the front white fronts were doing so badly, 2010, we were stripped off because it was 20 degrees. So we looked at this place and we thought, this is great. Why the hell aren't they just all breeding and doing really well? Because it was lovely and balmy and warm. Okay, there were mosquitoes everywhere, but everything looked great. Tons of habitat, grass growing, crack on, breed. What's wrong with you? But yeah, that's what they're playing with. You don't know one year to the next really how it's going to be when you get there, and you just have to go for it. As I say, they're well insulated. I've seen them sit on Loch Ken on a field for 5, 6, 7 days in a row, just sit. And a little bit of snow around them thaws out and they kind of peck around at that. But actually, they're basically insulated. They're basically in a quilt, a damn good quilt. And as long as they've got a bit of food in them, they'll just sit there and wait for things to change. Basically, yeah, mid-May to first week of June, that's when they need to get down to it. There's no other chance. If they miss that window, that's them. It's all over for the year, okay? What else is in the GPS tags is the accelerometer. So that's like a little Fitbit, I'm going to say. That measures your acceleration in 3 directions, X, Y, Z. So if you've got that in your collar tag and I go like that, like your Z directional register a downward movement. If I go like that, it's the other way. Flying flight, that has a very characteristic trace. So yeah, basically you've got all these 3 axes. That's obviously still, that's a bird at roost, sleeping at night. A little bit alert, a little bit of movement, but you've had a little sort of move in the Y direction before. Anyway, you can basically imagine what it's like, 3 directions, and you can video truth that against birds in captivity or that you can, pardon me, see in the field. And that is your diary of a goose. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to sit there and say, oh, I think it was doing that at 10:05 or whatever. No, this tells me it. This is a diary every 5 minutes, right through the day, day and night. From Loch Ken to Iceland to Greenland, you've got that the whole time. So that's unprecedented. This is massive big data you're getting on them. So you can really work out their energetics as well through this, because the two are closely correlated. So what we say is affects the breeding snow cover. That's the thing that we want to look at mostly. Yeah, this may affect on breeding success. So of all the clever kit we've got, what we have is 2 PhDs at present. So there's one working in North America on sort of all the different flyaways across the globe of the greater white-fronted goose. We have one that's concentrating more on the based extra, Luke, using all the Irish and Scottish data to look at the really green and white-fronted flyway and what is really going on with that. So that's in terms of the energetics, and it's in terms of the fine-scale GPS data. But that will really get this May snow cover. So he's looking at the MODIS satellite imagery and relating that to how much the females are able to move out and feed, and then what they're able to invest in their broods and the eggs. So it's all kind of based on this idea. There was a paper out a while back about the what they call North Atlantic oscillation. There's a multi-decadal oscillation in the North Atlantic, and really it's a kind of natural cycle. And all it means is in some sort of decades, you can basically have a wetter Greenland. And if you're talking about a more precipitation in Greenland, if that happens in May, then you might think that equates with snow cover and more snow. And then it can flip gradually into another phase, and it's actually a drier May period. So these are kind of natural cycles. And it's going to be very difficult to tease them out in itself now, but also then to understand what climate change and land use changes of man are going to overlay on top of that as well, and how that is going to affect our birds and other species as well. But Brian will sort that out. Brian's got all that. So yeah, this is, I mean, all right, that's things we can't do a huge amount about. We can study them and work out a bit what's going on. We can't make, but this is now autumn time when they're coming back to Iceland. These are potential threats now, I would say, that we can think about doing something with. You see there how they come back across in the autumn at a slightly higher route. In the spring, they come a lower route, probably because the wind direction is generally different. So even still there, they're getting knocked off further south. So this having to come in there and reorient themselves. Sometimes we've had them walk across the ice cap for 7 days as well. The tag birds. So yeah, again, hardy birds. 7 days, no food and water up there, and then fly on to Iceland. So yes, generally by start of September to end of September, all the birds back. This place is completely frozen up again. It's -20. So you can't hang around. You've got to get everything done. bring up the young, teach them what to do. They've got to fly, you've got to molt, then you've got to get back. This year, was it one of our Lochend ones was back in just at the end of August there, I think. That was the first one back of the tagged birds, which is quite unprecedented actually, to get one back in the last week of August. So yeah, threats like that. Here's that one, the blue one that went south. Here it comes. Nice. Yeah, it's made it through all of that. Great. I'm protected. I'm an internationally protected bird. No one can shoot me. Bang. I'm at a little resort near Reykjavik in a house. So unfortunately, that was a potential breeder, probably had young with it. And someone either targeted it or accidentally, because they're mixed in with grey legs sometimes, coming off a roost. It's a bit dark. Didn't mean to shoot you. Yeah, ends up getting shot. Unfortunately, the same year, another one ended up at the Nice Stay in Iceland hotel. That one I thought had bred as well. So that was that one, nobbled. Another potentially good female. As I say, the adults getting knocked off like that is not a good thing, because they're the ones, it takes quite a lot of while to build up experience and breed successfully. So that was a shame. Another one. So yeah, looking at that thing, Christ, these things they're meant to be protected. You've only got maybe 20 tags on birds, and 2 of them have been shot. So you're thinking, what does that equate to in percentages overall? It starts to build up. And then, of course, this is the lovely Ed. We would hang out in sheds, and we started to use a nice bit of kit here, a little portable X-ray machine, which is really good. So because you've got the direct shots, things getting down, you know those. Since 2016, we've X-rayed every bird we caught, Isla, Lochend, Kintyre, all those places, even Wexford actually. It takes a hell of a long while to get the samples up, because most times you only catch sort of 10 birds if you're lucky. So it's a lot of effort, but we got up to about 100 adults now. And at that point, 20% of them had 1 to 5 shotgun pellets embedded in them. So quite a lot of what used to be called sort of crippled birds, or basically, yeah, shot in lead. And that doesn't include the ones that have ingested lead off the ground as well. Some have that. Pardon me. You can't actually tell that the pellet is necessarily lead, but basically for some where we have been able to dig it out, like I had one under the bill there, I was able to dig that out of a young one, that you can crush it in a vice, so you can tell that's lead. And I believe most people in Iceland use lead anyway, because it's not banned. So yeah, it's the fact that they've got those embedded shot. And of course, that doesn't account for the ones that have got soft tissue injuries, like a bit of, I don't know, heart ripped out or a missing eye or whatever. You can't see that on an X-ray. So there's plenty of internal organs that get ripped out as well, and the shot to go straight through. So that's how it looks when you see it on a picture. So that one's got 3 embedded pellets. So there, it's hit the bone, hit a wing bone there, hit a leg bone there and stopped. And there's another one just off shot that's hit a leg bone there. So then you roll it over and you do another little X-ray to see what's going on a bit more. There's the shot hit, landed against the bone there. And then that one, what you could see was, oh, look, there's a load of lead shards on that bit. So again, that suggests it's lead because it's fractured, but that's actually broken the wee bone there, the wee wing bone. And then the bone has had to heal up again. And then it's managed to fly down from Iceland or wherever it got shot to Ireland at that point. So yeah, again, hardy birds can be carrying a lot of injuries. You see a lot of limping birds, things like that. That's another good telltale sign, really. I've come to the end now, I believe. Another one is, say, the sort of shooting side of it. I feel like it's something we can actually make a difference. We can try and educate and force home the message that these things are in trouble. And yeah, can you be a bit more careful with your shooting techniques, please? It doesn't, we think, happen too much in the UK, and of course Greenland, it's pretty remote anyway, so even the sort of native guys who were shooting a few apparently have agreed not to, so that's a good thing. The other threat for them, of course, is as land use has changed in Iceland, you tend to get birds hanging back quite a bit longer on stubbles now that they didn't used to have before, even potato stubbles, which can mean they stay there longer and longer and longer. Even in December, I've seen this now, and then suddenly a big cold set of winds comes down from the north, load of snow and ice, and they have to get out. There's no choice. They have to pile out, and they end up in something like this, which is a low system going across the Atlantic. And you see the tracks, if you're lucky, of the tagged birds getting blown off a way off. And I think these do account for the occasional birds you get recorded in Norway. So that's their final kind of massive hazard is getting past these guys. And again, Brian will get onto some of that aspect as well as to whether climate weirding or chaos or whatever you want to call it intensifies these storms, frequency of them as well. So yeah, that was just to illustrate one tag that was caught in Isla, went up in spring, got bashed off well to the east in one of those low systems, made it in, got over to Greenland, come back. Here you've got a big gap because it actually got bashed off again over here. And at the same time, lots of birds were being recorded on oil rigs and ships and things out there, way out east. It managed to get back in. There's a big gap here, about 3 days while it was out in the storm, and then it came back in and stayed at Loch Lomond, so it shifted site. Close at home, more recently, 2020, here's one in spring. So they get ready, 10th of April, left Isla, off it goes, bosh, hit a storm, hit a rain front, got knocked off east. That was the 11th of April. 12th of April, it's down in Denmark. I can't imagine that bird's been to Denmark before. Chap went out, managed to photograph all 3 of them. There's the little collars that we use now, the Ornitella ones, nice and neat. Don't know how many it was with to start with. It could have been with 20 birds. Some of them maybe did die. But anyway, those 2 survived and its mate. 7 days later, got the energy together and managed to navigate direct to Iceland, which pretty impressive. I don't think I could do that. If you dump me in Denmark, tell me to go to Iceland, I don't think I can do that. So yeah, throws up all sorts of questions. So yeah, just wanted to say at the end, I guess, what's the future going to be like for these Arctic geese, all the different types there that we met at the start? I'd just say the positives. I'll try and focus on positives. They can be ecosystem engineers a bit. They can carry seeds to new areas. They can kind of create habitats. They can graze habitats down. So if the climate sort of envelope is kind of okay, then maybe new habitats will establish in these places that they can use. Let's say the Greenland ice cap is, maybe that frees up new breeding areas, you know, if they can seed in the sedges and the grasses and the herbs that live there. Although they're traditional, okay, I keep going on about, oh, they're always at Loch Ken, da-da-da. Yes, they are traditional, but they're also kind of quick learners as well. They can learn about new crops or new places to go. So the pink feet that arrive on the Solway, it's not long before they know about a stubble. So me and Nick went up there the other day at Lochfoot. Suddenly there's a load of pink feet on that stubble. They all learn about it from others that are in the roost with. It might not be direct communication, but they'll see a bird fly off in an eager way and they'll follow it if they haven't got anything better to do. So yeah, cultural exchange. They adapt quickly to new crops. The pink feet have learned how to use maize stubbles very quickly on the continent. So you're thinking like blue tits eating the milk fat out of the top of your old milk bottles when we used to have milk bottles and milkmen. So yeah, very quick learners, although they're traditional, blah, blah, blah. And then, yeah, basically I was saying at the start about that huge variation that we've got to, evolution and events have got to work with. They're not all just going at once, you know, they're not all migrating to Iceland at once. It goes across a huge span of sort of 2 months that birds are going up. So yes, things might not be right sometimes for the first ones, but they'll probably be right for the middle ones and the later ones. So that will gradually feed through as well. It might not be genetic changes, but it might be learned knowledge that if they don't get shot as well, they can pass on to their young. We've already seen them adapt. You've got the tiger bean geese that used to come to D&G. They've already moved east. They're in Slamanan now, probably due to climate change. It's short stopping. It's happening. It's ongoing. Same with the Iceland great-egg geese. Arthur Thirlwell, guy who watches the Loch Ken flock. He used to see loads of Icelandic geese at great-egg geese at Loch Ken, thousands. There are SPAs designed around them, special protection areas designed around these places. All defunct now. They're all up in Orkney. Tons of grass up in Orkney. Why come all the way down to Loch Ken? No need. So that's all changed. So yes, we're seeing it happening now, and we're seeing it with white fronts. They're leaving Loch Ken 3 weeks earlier. They're leaving Wexford 3 weeks earlier. So it's all going on. So all I would say, I guess, before Brian's talking that, is that the rate, I think, of change in climate, if we can try and slow that a bit, I don't think we can change climate change, but the rate, I think, would be quite important. This sort of flattening the curve, that old chestnut, trying to get that into climate change a bit, and also the sort of change in land use types, think about that a bit more. But basically, there's going to be winners and losers in these geese, and it could switch round for the white front quite quickly. I just want to thank those guys. So yeah, Galloway Glens, RSPB recently, and Chinese Academy of Sciences, recent tag of work, NTS, Solway Coast ARMB, BBC, Esme Furburn, SNH and others for the old tracking stuff. Carl Mitchell-Beryl for helping me catch these wily birds over the years, and Arthur Fell and Brian Henderson for watching those flocks. Thank you.
Larry, that was brilliant. I think we're going to get you up next year as well. We're going to have you dressed as a sheep. Okay, I think I'll just add an extra. Yeah, just keep your microphone on. We've not finished with you yet. But before we move on and have a little bit of a break and charge glasses, does anyone in the audience have any questions? And that also, people on Zoom, we have someone out there about to shout questions in. So if you have a question, put your hand up and I'll come and give you the microphone. Not all at once. McNabb at the back, do you have any questions?
Any positive comments about you got built through the presentation, Barry?
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Well, if there's no questions at this point, what we're going to do here in Mowbray? Oh, we have questions have arrived all of a sudden.
Right, thank you. Right, I'm from Gretna, the inner Solway. We've been looking at a decline in the numbers of geese. In the inner Solway, between Gretna and Sillith, we have an increased number every year on. And to such an extent that they are causing a great deal of problems to the farmers. And they seem to stay longer. They are all eating the young grass that farmers have shut up for their sheep, lambs. The other point is that what they leave behind is causing health problems for the livestock that's to follow.
What, the droppings?
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Quite serious. I mean, I'm involved with. I own 3/4 of a mile of it, so I see what's happening. Now, the other point I would like to make is, why on earth do the geese want to leave us? They've got the best of vegetation in the UK. They go up to Iceland and Greenland, and I don't know what the vegetation is like. So why on earth do they want to go?
It's often a predator-free. They're often moving to much more predator-free habitats, so they can breed more successfully. It's often more disease-free as well. So these Arctic environments don't often have the diseases you have in temperate climates as well. So there's a number of reasons, plus also that sort of development of the vegetation up there. If you were to feed on the natural vegetation down here, it's often quite old and gradually becomes more and more woody and coarse. So if you lived on the salt marsh, say at Rockcliffe, and you set up a big breeding colony there like the gulls did, then unfortunately Mr. Foxy finds that pretty quick, because you're already all pushed to the edge because inland is just monoculture farming. So you try and pick somewhere like the marsh there, and as soon as predators get onto that, I think basically you wouldn't survive there. So let's say Loch Leven, there's a little feral group of barnacle geese up there. They're not producing anything like the young that you might expect, I think, because basically you're getting predated, and also they're suffering from things like avian tuberculosis, stuff like that. So they're quite, I've seen the young there, they're not very healthy looking at all. So yeah, the Arctic represents a fairly pristine environment a lot of the time. Again, that's something that might change with warming. But yeah, I guess the geese you're talking about are barnacle geese there. And a lot of the time that movement onto the land in bigger numbers at Redkirk, Birch and Gretna is really when you get those big high tide events that create a saline marsh there. So again, the sea level rise, climate change effects means more stormy events. It renders a lot of that marsh. I mean, you can have 30,000 geese there in early May, I should say. If you ever want to see geese migrating, go to Gretna and watch the marsh at 2nd of May, 6 till 8 p.m. You'll see a brilliant spectacle. 30,000 geese. But yes, they come on, I think, when conditions, they nip over to the pastures there. But I mean, around Claverack, of course, you've got a supportive barnacle goose management scheme, which pays. It's not compensation. It's not compensation, but it is a management scheme payment. So that's right. It should be. If
I mean, that's rather unfair, because some areas are this compensation. But
Yeah. Maybe
we do not get compensation.
No, that's it. No, that's something to discuss with Nature Scotland, I
I
guess.
think we have to move on. We've got two more questions, one from the audience and one from the Zoom crowd. So if you'd like to ask first, please.
Yeah, you mentioned about wind farms. Do they actually take regard to flyways when they're planning offshore wind farms?
I'd say no, and then usually come to the table after to actually check what effect it maybe has or doesn't have. But so far, if you like geese, fingers crossed, they've been pretty innocuous, because, I mean, Beckburn, you couldn't have placed the wind farm any worse, I would say, in a way. 9 turbines, 3 kilometres from Rockcliffe Marsh, where basically every barnacle goose that has managed to be conserved over the last 50 years and build the population, they all stage in Rockcliffe Marsh, and then they head out exactly through that area. So yeah, if I was putting a wind farm to test the idea that they're bad, that's where I'd put it. So they actually funded a lot of tags for 3 years, 4 years because of COVID. And of course, well, as you'd expect, none of them clattered into the turbines, but also they just showed they kind of pretty much spot them, move around them, and the conditions they migrate in tend to mean that they wouldn't clatter into them because it's not foggy, it's not raining and all that. They go in good conditions, sorry.
One last question from the Zoom audience, and we'll have a little comfort break. But Alan's been asking about the altitude that the geese are flying in, and does that pick up on the tags, and what are they doing?
The altitude is over the sea, generally sort of 10 to 30 meters. They're staying pretty low. If they hit a fog bank, a har at the East Coast, say, I've seen their little brains churring. They either go down to the Humber to avoid it and go out that way, or they go up over it and get some like 600 meters or whatever. But there's also some that go inland at Norway there when they hit the coast, and they're getting up to sort of 300 meters, 3K, something like that, to go over the mountain ranges. So yeah, a whole variety, but mostly they're keeping pretty low to the surface.
Thank you very much, Larry. We're going to have a little 10-minute break now, and we've got another performance coming up shortly, and then we've got Brian Huntley going to be presenting next. But Larry, thank you very much for your time and presentation. So we'd like to have a little break. Go and recharge your glasses. That's exactly what we're going to do here. See you shortly. Well, thank you. I don't know if everyone's back in the Zoom room. We've had a bit of a shuffle at the stage here. We've got a little lectern here now. I think everyone's coming in from the bar, tinkling their glasses. I hope people on the Zoom meeting have also gone and got themselves a little refreshment as well. We're going straight back into performance art now with Chelsea Nash, who's acting the spirit of the goose, and she's got a little spoken word piece she's going to talk to us about before Brian comes up on stage. So, Chelsea, without any further ado, would you like to come and join us?
The wind was getting colder, the days were getting shorter, and the leaves on the trees where we lived began to slowly die. We knew it was time to go. Where exactly? Back to where we came from, back to where our ancestors came from too. And while they loved it dearly, they couldn't remain there all the time. When the weather is warm and calm and the food is bountiful and the water doesn't freeze us to the bone, it's a remarkable place to live. But it isn't always like that. So we must leave it for somewhere else. A second home. It's pleasant, but not as good as home. Nothing is as good as home. It's an exciting time of year. We must leave everything behind, for we have no way of transporting goods to faraway places. We are birds, you know. And together, take flight back to our homeland, where we are safe, comfortable, and happy. We were off to follow the summer, its forgiving heat and pleasant weather, knowing that it will guide us to where we truly belong. It's a long journey, but we don't mind. We sing as we go. Our wings don't get tired. Knowing where we're heading to gives us the strength to make it there. We make plans for the next 6 months, the nests we shall build, the chicks we shall introduce to the world, the memories we shall make. As we soar through the air, look down at the earth below. Can't help but notice the changes here and there. Well, that didn't used to be there. Oh, well, that used to be a field stretching out for miles and miles. They built those big people places quickly, didn't they? Another giant tube with smoke coming out of it. How many of those do they need? They don't do us any good, filling our hard-working lungs with whatever stuff lives within it. We don't let that bother us. We're far away from it all where we're going. It's all just nature at its finest. Pure, honest nature, where creatures just get on with it. Yeah, you win some, you lose some. Yeah, sure, there's the odd predator here and the odd disastrous storm there, but overall, life is good. There's only one thing that can really mess things up, but that was nothing we'd ever have to worry about. Something's not right. Something's not right at all. I could have swore that this was the place. Our place. No, no, it can't be. The surrounding area looks the same, and our instincts brought us here. But this isn't home. This is a wasteland. We have no choice but to land. Our wings refuse to carry us for any longer. Normally, we would land in one of the many green sublime trees, but we couldn't. There were no trees. Not a single one. Where are they gone? How can something like this happen? We are reminded by some of the older, wiser birds of the people. We are reminded of their greed. Apparently, they'll never have enough space, and they'll never have enough food, and they'll never have enough water, and they'll never have enough things. They could have all the things, and it still wouldn't be enough. How do we know this? Because all we want are a few trees where we can make our nests and find our food, with a little stream where we can get our water. All we want is here. That's all we need. That, to us, is enough. Yet they won't let us have it. They want it. All in their pursuit of enough. We can hear their beasts in the distance, the things with the claws and the legs that spin, crushing the ground beneath it and destroying everything in their path. The people sit on their backs and tell them what to do. Then there's the fire. Oh yeah, we know that. We know exactly what that is. We don't know how they make it, but my, oh my, is it cruel. So cruel. All we can do is sit and look at our paradise, our home, taken from us in the same way it's been taken from so many others. Why? Well, that's something we'll never really know for sure. All we can do is hope. Hope that someday enough will be enough. Thank you very much.
Chelsea, thank you very much. That was very haunting. Oh, that's Bertrada just gone past as well. That was very haunting, Chelsea. Thank you very much for that. Next up, we've got the Professor Brian Huntley. He's been involved in the study of geese and Arctic species for many, many years. He's going to talk to us about the problems that the wild fauna geese are facing in the face of a changing climate. So Brian, if you'd like to come up. There will be a slight pause as I try and wrestle with technology and get the screen shared, but Brian's going to ad lib for 2 or 3 minutes whilst we sort this out.
I don't think I need that. Well, hi everybody. I was told just at the beginning of the evening that I have to ad lib for a few minutes. I wasn't sure what to ad lib about, but I thought I might just say a few words. First of all, correct the impression, I haven't done work on geese, but I have worked on potential impacts of climate change on birds breeding across Europe and also throughout Africa and more particularly in Southern Africa. So I've done a lot of work on climate change and birds, but Larry, wherever he's disappeared to, is the real expert on geese, not me. And apparently we're ready to go. So what I was asked to talk about tonight particularly was climate change and migratory species like the geese that we value so much, thank you, in Galloway, wintering in this area. So that's what I'm going to be doing. And there we go. Basically, in the talk that I'll try to keep reasonably brief tonight, I'm going to focus first of all upon climate change, and I'll spend more of the lecture, the talk on that than any other aspect. And I'm especially going to try and talk about and draw attention to those things about which we have a high degree of certainty, and also contrast that with some of those aspects of climate change about which there is, on the other hand, substantial uncertainty. I'm then going to talk about the particular challenges that migratory species, particularly migratory birds, face as climate changes. I'm going to talk briefly about past climatic change. I've done a lot of work over the years on past climates and how they've changed, and compare those past climates of the recent geological past with what's projected in terms of future changes. And then I'm going to say a little bit about what we can say about the future prospects for the geese that winter in this region, and a few brief conclusions. So firstly then, climatic change. We all know by now of the principal certainty, and that is that as concentrations of greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and also various man-made halogenated organic compounds that are used in aerosols and the like, as the concentrations of those increase in the atmosphere, that leads to an overall global heating. And that happens because of what we call the greenhouse effect, because those gases absorb outgoing, where's Larry's stick gone? It's disappeared. Ah, there it is. Let me just point to the relevant part of this. So we've got solar radiation coming in, some of it's reflected back. The Earth radiates mostly thermal radiation, infrared radiation, and these gases in the atmosphere then absorb and re-radiate that rather than allowing it to escape to space, as that other arrow suggests. And that's the greenhouse effect. This is just basic physics, and we've known about it for a long time. As climate warms, so we get increasing concentration of greenhouse gases, climate warms, each 1 degree centigrade of warming that we get results in an increased frequency and severity of the highest temperatures. So if we look at these charts, what we've got here are charts showing on the top left the number of days, and in particular the increase in number of days that would classify as heat wave days, the increase in the number of heat wave events annually, the increased duration of events, and the intensity of those heat waves. And obviously some areas are experiencing only limited, for example, increases in event duration, but some areas are experiencing considerable increases in all of these aspects of heat waves, the extreme heat, as the global system warms up. There are other simple basic physics involved, and these include that there will be, as the globe warms, there'll also be an overall increase in the global quantity of precipitation. Put very simply, warmer air can transport more water vapor. Warmer ocean surfaces lead to more evaporation. That provides the atmosphere with more water vapor. As that warm air rises, whether in a storm system or moving over land areas of higher elevation, mountains, the water vapor condenses and we get precipitation. And more water in the system, more water vapor in the atmosphere means more precipitation. And the upper graphic here just illustrates the predicted pattern of areas in deep blue having greatest increases in annual precipitation, areas in these shades having little change. What you don't see on there is very many areas with any decrease in precipitation. Hang on to this stick. In addition to the general increase in precipitation, as I've just pointed out, it doesn't occur uniformly. Some areas will experience considerable increases, some areas will see no change, and there will be some areas with perhaps small decreases. But at the same time, there will be an increased incidence of drought in some areas, because even if this precipitation is more or less maintained, the warmer soil surfaces will lead to greater evaporation from those soil surfaces. They will lead to more transpiration of moisture, the moisture that's taken up by plants and evaporated through the leaves into the atmosphere. And that will lead to reduced soil moisture and a reduction in runoff. So here we see on this chart, the red colors are the areas where there'll be increased frequencies of dry days, conditions when the soil is dry, unable to supply plants, demands for moisture. And this chart, in contrast to that one, you see large areas of increased drought now all around the Mediterranean, southern Africa, and notably much of Amazonia, all suffering from potentially increased incidence of drought. Oh, did I do that? There also is high certainty, in addition to the temperature, the precipitation, the incidence of drought, there's also high certainty about increased thermal energy in the atmosphere, leading to more energetic storm systems. Those will have stronger winds, and there'll be greater intensities of precipitation associated with them. We also have high certainty and lots of observational evidence already that the climatic changes that will occur will vary in magnitude across different regions of the globe, and could even be, as we've seen hints of already, of opposite sign in different regions. And this chart, this picture is illustrating this pattern for temperature. So what this graphic is showing is for a 1 degree centigrade increase in the global mean temperature, which is the headline figure that we all here talked about, when people say keeping global warming below 1.5 or 2 degrees centigrade, they're talking about the global mean temperature. So for a 1 degree centigrade increase in global mean temperature, this shows the predictions that have been made about the pattern of warming regionally. All the darker shades here are places that will warm more than the global mean of 1 degrees, and the paler shades, mostly over the oceans, will warm less. And of particular relevance to what we're talking about today and our Arctic breeding geese, look at how much more than the 1 degree, up to 2 or even 3 degrees or more warming, we're seeing predicted for the Arctic. And somebody's messing with my slides again. Can we go back one, please? So that pattern of greater heating in the Arctic is what's referred to as a polar amplification of the warming. And again, that reflects some basic physics. This picture tries to illustrate what we think of or what we envisage when we look to the Arctic. The basic physics is the relationship between the color of a surface and the amount of the incoming solar radiation that it reflects and the amount that it absorbs. So snow-covered areas, short vegetation, ice sheets, sea ice, all of these have a very high reflectivity because of the snow surface. Vegetation, on the other hand, has a much lower reflectivity. It absorbs more of the incoming radiation, as do actually many glaciers if they're not covered with fresh snow, because the ice is often very dirty with lots of entrained rock flour. And the ocean itself absorbs because it also has a low reflectivity. So if we have decreases in snow cover, decreases in sea ice, decreases in ice sheets, all of these reduce the areas of high reflectivity and increase the areas of lower reflectivity, and hence increase the amount of incoming energy from the sun that's absorbed in these areas. And what we find when we look at the record is that we do indeed have considerable decreases in all of these things. So this is the extent of sea ice in the Northern Hemisphere from 1980 through to 2020. And what you can see, I am sure, straightforwardly, is a steady, he's done it again, a steady decrease in the overall amount of sea ice year on year. If we move to just the seasonal picture, so now instead of looking at years, we're looking at June through October, and we're looking at the amount of ice in the Arctic basin. The grey line here is the median value for the period 1981 to 2010. The grey band reflects the uncertainty, the variability about that during that interval. The dashed line here is the extreme low year to date, which was 2012, and the blue line is this year. So it currently, when I downloaded it, when I was preparing this, it came through just past the minimum in late September. But you see it dips, but most importantly, it's been dipping more and more in recent years. And expressed geographically, what you see here is, this is the sea ice extent. Sorry, that thing is masking it out. This is the sea ice extent on that minimum day this year. So 15th, 16th September 2021. That's the extent of sea ice. The orange line here is the median edge of the sea ice at its minimum, 1981 to 2010. And this shows the density of sea ice. So how much of the ocean within that overall extent of the ice is actually covered by ice, as opposed to polynyas and other openings in the sea ice. And what you see is that the proportion, the area with 100% sea ice cover is actually only quite a small part of the total ice sheet. And that too is something that has been, not only is the ice cover reducing, but the extent of the continuous sea ice is also steadily reducing. We're getting shorter seasonal snow cover in the Arctic, and we're also getting increased melting, illustrated here by the Greenland ice sheet. And again, you can't see the top of the slide, but what these represent is 3 days in August this year, middle of August. The orange area is the area that is experiencing surface melt, and these are extreme compared to the historic extent of surface melt in Greenland. And in fact, in August this year, in the middle of August, for the first time on record, it rained on the summit of Greenland as opposed to snowed. It rained. It got warm enough to rain up there this year. So cumulative melt days for 2021, almost nowhere, these white areas didn't have some melting. This is looking at it a different way. Gray line again is median, 1981 to 2010. Gray shading, the variation about that median, and the colored lines mostly between 2000 and 2021, colored lines showing the seasonal extent of melting and how, I'm sure you can see straight away, how much it is frequently peaking well above the historic values. So we're seeing loss of these high, we call it albedo, highly reflective areas, and replacement by lower reflectivity, more absorption of the solar radiation. And that leads to this greater intensity of warming at the higher latitudes, this polar amplification. That's something that we not only are certain about in terms of the physics, but we are seeing happening. There are areas, and that should say, areas of certainty. We're highly certain that ice sheets are melting and continuing to melt. We're highly certain that sea level is increasing as a result of that ice sheet melting. The sea ice melting doesn't raise the sea level any more than the ice cube melting in your gin and tonic causes it to flow over the top of the glass. But the Greenland ice sheet melting or other terrestrial ice melting does raise sea level. This brings us to uncertainties. We're very uncertain about the future rates of ice sheet melting and hence the future rates of sea level rise. We're certain it'll happen. We're very uncertain about the rates at which it will happen. The IPCC 6th report this year projects a sea level rise by the end of this century, and this reflects that uncertainty, of between 33 centimeters, which might not sound too bad, and 102 centimeters, more than a meter of sea level rise potentially by the end of the century. That has serious implications for example, the salt marshes that Larry was talking about in terms of wintering geese. Ice sheet melting is also something that once we've triggered it, once we've started it, it will go on. Even if we do stop emitting greenhouse gases by the middle of this century, ice sheet melting will continue. It's a slow system. It will continue happening. So by 2300, the projection is from the IPCC that now, compared to 33 to 102 centimeters by the end of this century, by 2300, the sea level rise is projected to be between 1 meter and 6.3 meters. But with even considerable uncertainty around that, because there is considerable uncertainty about what's referred to as marine ice cliff instability, where you get ice sheets with an ice cliff facing into the sea, as you do at the edge of many ice sheets in Antarctica in particular. We're very uncertain about how quickly those ice cliffs might fall over and lead the ice to move forward more quickly. But if the ice cliff instability was as great as it is considered possible, then that sea level rise by 2300 could be 16 meters, which has very serious implications for a very large part of the human population, as well as for geese and other organisms. Another area of uncertainty that is important in terms of wildlife, the geese we're thinking about, but also in terms of UK agriculture, is the potential for so-called tipping points in the climate system, and in particular in this context, specifically a tipping point related to what's called the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation. This is an ocean circulation that transports heat energy from the tropical Atlantic to the Arctic. And the best known expression, as far as we're all concerned, of this is the Gulf Stream, or the North Atlantic Drift. What we have on this slide is a representation of the global ocean circulation. And what we're talking about when we talk about the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation are these two components. The red here is the warm surface current, the North Atlantic Drift and Gulf Stream, that brings warm water and hence heat energy from the tropical Atlantic up into the North Atlantic. And the blue line here is a return circulation of cold, deep water coming down. And that's the overturning, the warm water going up, sinking in the Arctic and coming back as a cold, deep water flow. We know from observations that began in the 1990s, when we first got concerned about this, that this overturning circulation is weakening. So we're moving from a, if you like, historic situation with a strong North Atlantic Drift and Gulf Stream, lots of heat energy being transported north, and a strong cold return flow, to a much weaker circulation. We still have a gyre circulation driven by winds in the tropical Atlantic, but a much weaker North Atlantic Drift and Gulf Stream, and a weaker return flow, which means a lot less heat energy being transported into the higher latitudes of the North Atlantic. So it's been weakening, it's projected to weaken, and we know from the past that it at times completely shut down during the last glacial stage, the end of the ice age. So this is our normal state, an intermediate state we don't need to worry too much about. During the glacial, at times it shut down completely. There's no import of warm surface water at all. And when that happens, this is what happens to temperature in globally. All the blue colors here are colder, the orange colors warmer. Actually leads to more energy into the southern hemisphere, so we get some warming down there. But the really key thing is these coolings of several degrees, up to 3, 4, even 5 degrees around the North Atlantic, and more extensively across the northern hemisphere continents. We know that this circulation can flip from an on to an off state in a very short period of time, because it did it a number of times during the last 100,000 years, during the last glacial period. It last did it rather spectacularly about 8,200 years ago. Sounds a long time as far as we're concerned. Geologically, that's very recent. We know when that happens that the consequence for Europe is severe in terms of vegetation. So briefly explain here, what we've got is, with the intermediate state of the circulation, so weakened but still flowing, the climate in Europe is supporting mostly boreal forests and parklands. So these purples and blues, boreal parklands, evergreen forest, the typical boreal forest, and larch forests, birch forests. When it stops, when that tipping point occurs and that circulation switches off, we see a shift. Most of Europe is now supporting shrub tundra or even polar desert. rather than the forests. So a very big shift in the climate and a big shift as a result in the vegetation. So the consequences potentially of such a tipping point of that mode shift are severe. Might it happen? Well, in the past, we know those mode shifts to the off state were associated with periods of rapid ice sheet melting or sudden additions of large volumes of fresh water to the North Atlantic. So there's a risk that we really cannot ignore that a substantial acceleration of melting of the Greenland ice sheet could trigger such a shift. That's something we've known about since the 1990s, and that's why people started monitoring the strength of this overturning circulation and how we know that it has indeed been weakening. Other areas of uncertainty, we're uncertain about the magnitude and rate of the future climate changes. We know what the directions will be, but we're not very certain about the magnitudes and the rates. We have less certainty about the details of regional patterns of change than we have about the overall global changes. But what we're all certain about is that the degree of uncertainty increases the more warming occurs. So as warming increases, the uncertainty increases. So enough about climate change for the moment. Let me turn to the migratory birds. All species, ourselves included, face challenges when the climate changes. Migratory species face potentially the greatest challenges because in order for their populations to sustain themselves, to maintain themselves, they require suitable climatic and habitat conditions, not only in their breeding areas, but in their non-breeding areas and in their staging or refueling areas. And also, as Larry was emphasizing at the end of his talk, they require suitable weather conditions favorable to their migratory flights at the critical seasons when they're making those flights. So they're vulnerable to climatic changes in all those different stages of their annual cycle of life, as it were. I'm saying that, that's not to say that migrants can't adapt to changing conditions. Clearly, climate has changed in the past. I've just talked about the last glacial stage, the Ice Age, in contrast to the present. Clearly, these geese were able to survive, to persist through those changes. They adapted to them. If they hadn't, they'd no longer be with us. But there are important contrasts between what we know about those past changes and projected future climate changes. Firstly, the rate at which global climate is projected to change is already changing during this century, unless we rapidly reach so-called net zero. The rate at which it's changing is faster, potentially much faster than past rates of global climate change. That's not to say that there have not been regionally very rapid climatic changes when we look back over the timescales of millennia to hundreds of millennia, like those associated with that tipping point, that mode change of the Atlantic Meridional overturning circulation. There have been these large-scale, rapid changes in ocean and atmosphere circulation. But what we know is that the headline figure, the one we always hear about, the global mean temperature, has not changed as rapidly in the past as in the projected future. The second issue to note is that if we continue with unabated or insufficiently reduced emissions of greenhouse gases, then we're rapidly heading towards what is effectively the unknown. Greenhouse gas levels, climatic conditions, unlike anything for at least several million years. To put it another way, unlike any experienced by the majority of species on Earth today, ourselves included, that have evolved as species only within the last million years or less in the vast majority of cases. And incidentally, you'll sometimes hear the argument put forward, especially by climate change deniers or skeptics, that, well, the last interglacial, the last period during the Ice Age when climatic conditions were broadly similar to the present, the period since the end of the last glacial stage, that period had global mean temperatures that are estimated to have been up to about 1.5 degrees centigrade warmer than pre-industrial times. And people will argue that, well, species clearly survived that episode, that they could survive a 1.5 degrees centigrade warmer world, so they should survive future warming. Maybe that also implies that we have to keep the warming within the 1.5 level. But there is an underlying flaw in this argument, which is that the fundamental cause of the warmer conditions 120,000 years or so ago, during that last interglacial stage, the fundamental cause was quite different from that causing the current warming. Warming then was the result of changes in the Earth's orbit that had led to an increase in the summer seasonal amount of sunshine received in the Northern Hemisphere, which meant the peak warming was actually in the Northern Hemisphere summer. The present warming, due to greenhouse gases, is strongest in the winter months because it's the blanket of greenhouse gases preventing outgoing thermal radiation from the Earth escaping to space, rather than the incoming energy from the sun being increased. That leads to quite different seasonal patterns of warming. It has potential very serious implications for Arctic and boreal species that were not affected in the same way by the summer warming of the last interglacial. So, for example, last interglacial warming led to little difference in the vegetation of West Greenland compared to today. It essentially remained mostly shrub tundra with some polar desert near to the ice sheets. The projected future conditions, however, are such that the climate would support birch woodlands and even spruce forest. Completely different kinds of vegetation, potentially in West Greenland, under future warming than in that past period. We also have, when it comes to thinking about the contrast with the past, the contrast that most species today are already facing one or more other stresses arising from human activities: habitat loss, pollution, degradation of habitats, and as Larry was emphasizing, hunting, often illegal hunting. All of those stresses, climate change then adds to. So what are the future prospects for our Arctic breeding geese? Not just the Greenland white fronts that Larry focused upon, but as he pointed out, we have the Barnacle Goose population from Svalbard migrating in here to mostly the inner Solway. We have the Greenland white fronts coming across, staging in Iceland, down here. The pinkfoots that he mentioned breeding in East Greenland and northwards, and in Iceland, coming down here. And I've added on here this for the East Canadian Arctic breeding Brent geese that come via Iceland down, and which I enjoy watching each year a few of in Loch Ryan, where they always seem to turn up. As Larry's pointed out, the Greenland white fronts have declined as warmer conditions in the Atlantic have led to greater spring snowfalls on their breeding grounds, which causes delay or failure of breeding. The projections are that the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, as I've mentioned, will continue to weaken. Now, as that weakens, that leads to relative cooling of the North Atlantic at higher latitudes. And that in turn leads to a less positive or even negative state of the oscillation that Larry mentioned, the North Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation. If that oscillation moves to a less positive or a negative state, that's associated with reduced spring snowfall in West Greenland. We're also seeing the Greenland ice sheet retreating. So potentially the breeding area for Greenland the Greenland population of white-fronted geese could increase as a result of the changes in ocean circulation and the retreat of the Greenland ice sheet. So they might seem likely to be going to benefit from climatic change in terms of greater breeding opportunities, greater breeding success. However, as I've already mentioned, the future climate projected for West Greenland is such that it could support woodlands of birch, even spruce forests in place of the tundra favored by the geese, the tundra habitats that they use. Add to that there is a population of Canada geese which migrate into West Greenland from eastern Canada, migrate into Greenland to breed. They migrate from areas where birch and spruce are present. And Larry's already mentioned that the geese can carry seeds. We have a vector, the Canada goose. We have the potential for seeds of these trees to be carried into West Greenland. And we have the climate changing in a way that would favor establishment of those trees. If that occurs, then that will much reduce the potential breeding habitat for the Greenland white-fronted geese in West Greenland. So the only conclusion I can reach on that front is that the prospects for the Greenland white-fronted geese are at best very uncertain. They might gain, they might lose. I would not like to predict which. I'm not going to dwell on the details, but all of our other Arctic breeding geese face similar uncertain futures, not just in terms of conditions on the breeding grounds, but also the challenges that are posed by larger, more energetic autumn storm systems in the North Atlantic with the potential to disrupt their migration that may blow them, as Larry illustrated, hundreds or even 1,000 or more kilometers off course. And then there are other changes going on in Galloway around us here. So, conclusions. What do I conclude about the prospects for our geese? I conclude that there's great uncertainty. So much so that making any specific predictions is at best very difficult and at worst potentially seriously misleading. What we can say is that the rapid regional climatic changes, that these will occur, that they often will lead to shifts in the locations that offer suitable conditions, whether it's for breeding or wintering, but especially for breeding, as well as to potentially important changes in the habitat in the areas they currently use, a switch from tundra to boreal woodland in West Greenland, for example. Overall, there will certainly be some species that will benefit from climatic change, but the evidence suggests that the number of losers will exceed the number of those winners. The net result from all the work that we have done and that's been published by others is a projected loss in global biodiversity, compounding the already dire losses that have resulted from other human activities. And that loss in biodiversity could easily include loss of some of the populations of geese that we value as winter visitors to this region. And I'm going to end with a very personal comment. It greatly saddens me when I was writing this talk to think back and realize that back in 1987, I attended a live concert, one of a tour of concerts by the Albion Band and Chris Baines, that was trying to draw attention to the biodiversity crisis problems that we were already aware of. The last two songs in their performance were entitled, sorry, I should have gone on to that. You can still get hold of recordings of it if you want to. The last two songs are entitled Tomorrow's Too Late, and a rather poignant one, Why Have You Stolen Our Earth? On behalf of children. At that time, our children, my wife and I, had twin children, 3 years old at the time of that concert. 34 years on, it was 1987, 34 years on, my wife and I have 3 grandchildren, 3.5, 13 and 14. The problems of which we were already well aware then have still not been tackled by global governments in any adequate way. So I end with the thought that it is now imperative that the delayed international meetings related to the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, main part of which will happen in China next April and May, and the meeting that we hear so much about that's going to happen in Glasgow, COP26, the 26th Conference of the Parties to the Framework Convention on Climate Change. It's imperative that these lead to actions and not just to more fine words on the part of our politicians. I'll leave it there. Thank you. Oh, I should say,
Brian, it was pretty good. I'll just, yeah. I think those words at the end are something we can all recognise. I got involved in environmental work in about the late 80s myself, and all those warnings were there and have not been listened to really at all since then. And we've had lots of fine words, haven't we, since then? But all we've seen is an acceleration in change. And
have not yet been realised.
Yeah, almost all of the SPAs and SACs and triple SIs, etc., in Scotland are either in poor condition when they're meant to be protected, or they've not actually invested any money to even monitor them, so we don't even know what condition they're in. It's actually quite easy to say everything's okay because we checked it 20 years ago. So that's kind of, we do face a big challenge. Anyway, there's been some comments on the Zoom audience about using a big cane which we're using in here and it not being very useful for the Zoom audience. Hence, I started trying to use the cursor. So I can apologise, Brian.
Sorry.
I started moving you around the screen, but
I saw the cursor being moved around, but then it clicked the slides as well.
If you could, anyone on Zoom and in the audience can make some criticism, constructive criticism, 2 each time for each event. We'll try and resolve. We'll resolve the. I think we'll resolve the speaker and volume problem this time, but I think we'll go for a couple of questions to Brian from the audience, and then if we can invite Larry back up to the front, we'll have a little roundup of questions, and then we'll bring everything to a close. So, hands up for questions. Everyone was pretty shy last time. So we have a question right at the back from a guy you might know actually.
I remember teaching this guy.
He's a guy called Dr. Larry Griffin, I think, who was a young student of Brian's about 62 years ago.
I was just thinking, I was kind of Harry Hill. Who do you think will win out between the closing down of the Gulf Stream and the kind of cooling of the North Atlantic versus the thawing of the ice sheets up there? So can the Gulf Stream kind of come to the rescue of the ice sheets on Greenland by making the whole area cooler again, so you actually almost enter a glacial period again?
The short answer is yes, it could. If it flipped to its off state completely, then as you saw, temperatures will drop by anything up to 5 degrees around the North Atlantic. That would pretty much stop the Greenland ice sheet melting. In the past, under glacial conditions, it actually triggered ice sheet growth. But yes, that could do that. But think about the implications for people living in Norway, or even for agriculture in Britain, if temperatures around here dropped by a mean of, and 3 degrees doesn't sound very much when you think that the daily variation can be 10 or 12 degrees, but 3 degrees in the mean, put that in terms of growing season warmth. If every day is 3 degrees cooler across your 150-day growing season, you're losing 450 degree days. That's enough to push a lot of areas from being agriculturally productive to not being possible to grow crops. So yes, it might rescue some of that Arctic, but we might not like living here, and our geese might actually have to go further south for the winter because it wouldn't be terribly nice around here. And it was the realization of the implications potentially for UK agriculture, for people living in Norway specifically, that led to a joint program starting in the 1990s to monitor the strength of that circulation. And that program was funded principally by our government and the Norwegian government.
Okay, thank you. I think we're coming to a sort of natural end now. So I'd like Larry, if you could come to the front, please, and Chelsea and Lucy could come to the front as well. I'm terrible with names. Apologies, Lucy. And if everyone could just, in a normal way, please thank everyone for turning up. And thank you all for turning up as well.